70 years ago from this recording, in the year of 1955, a television series aired called Sam and Friends. It was a very short show centered around puppet characters, featuring those like Kermit the Frog, who would become the building blocks of something greater after its initial release. Most of the series was actually never really preserved and considered lost media, but paved the way for Jim Henson to develop it into something that stuck with society as of 2025 itself, which of course I am referring to the Muppets, named for the combination of the words marionette and puppet that Jim Henson created for families to enjoy. They appeared on several skits and other television shows like the Sesame Street, where kids started to get enchanted by their absurd humor and musical comedy before gaining their own show that the world would lay their eyes on, with celebrity cameos galore in a variety of sketches. That these characters had a certain flair that connected with its audience even amidst having a bunch of people today that we may or may not know about, knowing exactly how to connect with the audience as fictional characters brought to life with our own real ones. But for people like me that were born long after such a series was made, it was probably the movies that made us fans, exploring their antics and popularity wherever they went, and putting their own twist on classic tales of ode or just typical journeys that we love to watch. The rainbow connection that we will all soon find, where was just something alluring about these characters that you just had to watch even if some of the subject matter happens to be like a parody of the original work, or they were just doing adventures they were making themselves. That those like Kermit the Frog just represented the everyman, fostering connections between the sane and insane nature of our two worlds that has become a symbol of pop culture just as much as Mickey Mouse, where Kermit is to Jim Henson as Walt is to Mickey Mouse, as they are the alter ego personas of the men who created these things for all to enjoy. That the story of the Muppets reflects a greater need society needed to see, that these characters hold so much meaning as kids and as adults through their wilding ranging personas of pragmatists and animalistic wackos, if you get what I mean. And like a lot of other things, fortunately or unfortunately if you think that way, they are under the Disney umbrella, helping to produce some of their movies, as I mentioned, that I grew up loving to watch, where they would find new life under a studio that was founded by a man with a similar vision to their own. At least that would be the hopeful image of all things, where we all know that Disney's corporate side does not do the best job in actually executing what could be with the properties that they own, and just have a great problem as we have to discuss in some form. Because while they are certainly far from dead or forgotten, they also haven't been utilized in the best way according to many fans, and something I question in terms of the content they have had for a while since their last major film that was released in theaters. That this video also happens to come at the time of the closure of a major attraction that Disney did back in the 80s with Jim Henson himself just before he died in something called Muppet Vision 3D, a classic according to many that has now gone because they're building a new Monsters Inc. land for their own Hollywood Studios park. Of course, they're also planning to do things like retheme one of their rides into a new Muppets attraction, but many people feel like they shouldn't have removed something like that, or just handled the Muppets in the way they have been for the past decade or so, where I just seek to wonder, what can they do now with Muppets to return to a bigger presence again? Because nowadays it just doesn't feel the same when they did those initial movies that I remember watching, and of course with the voices that they got rid of Steve Whitmire as the voice of Kermit, where the other one, although he's good, doesn't really scream Kermit to me anymore. Or it's just something that I'm more confused to think about, or although I have loved the Muppets too, I also don't really think back on them too often or feel the same way that others have felt when Muppet Vision went down or the vision of Jim Henson in places like this. More about the curiosity of what should you do with the Muppets, Disney? What is the right thing to have under your belt or to continue the legacy for this generation? Where I just wanted to discuss this problem of what can you do with the Muppets, because I'm someone who really doesn't know what more can you do other than the course they've been doing now, or what can be done to fully utilize them like many people have been clamoring for, and just to openly discuss how and what do people feel when they see the Muppets in this day and age. Well, to start this video off, and mainly speaking of the Disney history, goes way back to the theme park itself, with Hollywood Studios at the time of Michael Eisner being Disney CEO in 1989, the same year we know that Disney exploded back to life with The Little Mermaid. Eisner negotiated with Jim Henson at the time to acquire the Muppets property with plans to debut an attraction or land based off the Muppets a year later, which happens to be that Muppet Vision 3D attraction. But the full deal never went through at the time because Jim Henson unfortunately died, where they just went with the attraction through a licensing deal, or they would also just produce some of their movies during the same time frame. And then finally in 2004, Disney, with Eisner still actually there, got the chance to buy the Muppets outright and fully own most of their properties and characters under their belt, signifying a new age for them that wasn't really in the limelight for quite a while. Where even though they had mostly movies, they weren't also the biggest ones, with some of them being on home video or television rather than the earlier successes that they've had, where it was most notable that they weren't quite in the mainstream as they once were, compared to the initial Muppet Show period in the 70s, where, to my own understanding when I was young at the time, it was just through watching these movies on DVD that gave me any sort of recognition with them as a kid, but actually starting to notice more of them when Disney actually brought them into the fold, which I guess many really didn't know about until the bigger projects started getting their release, and the fact that Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm did overshadow the purchase for more stuff modern audiences were familiar with, where the starting point was still with the television film with The Muppets Wizard of Oz, still doing movies based on other properties that were already done before since that's what they were known for at the time. But then later, Disney gradually started getting back in the groove of where they were, appearing in the regular media and viral videos until of course the Muppet movie came out in 2011. This was the movie that really changed things once again, revitalizing the Muppets from where they have been, strictly speaking in terms of just being themselves rather than portraying other characters, where the plot of this movie kind of represents the state they were in from their own heyday, trying to save the Muppet Theater where they performed so many years ago. Like, the entire intent of this very movie was to showcase how they've been out of the public eye and their methods to restore just that, to remind the public why we love the Muppets in the way that they are, which is a little bit crazy to think about right now since this video is addressing many people's concern that the Muppets aren't really used by Disney that much, or it feels like what it felt before this movie was released, and considering at the time Disney made something like this that actually pushed them back into the limelight. And for someone who only got to watch the original Muppet movie at home, I too also felt that they were back in a big way with new characters and their own relationship with the Muppets and what they meant to people, a great continuation of their story from how they got together and how they got back together, where the Muppets themselves excelled when they were put into real life scenarios and parodied them to the 10th degree with its constant lineup of cameos for its time and what humor could do for you and the music that they made. And its success propelled further content developed by Disney in terms of ordering a sequel immediately and getting their own collective star on Hollywood Walk of Fame, where although less successful, Muppets Most Wanted was also a very good time that continued the same comedic tropes with them going around the world with a criminal named Constantine that looks similar to Kermit himself, and also was played by the same guy who would voice Kermit currently. But also looking back on it now, it also seems cheesy with the amount of celebrities involved in these films, still knowing the history with the Muppet Show and other content surrounding it where they are just fan favorites. Like, you look back on it now, just like you probably did with the original run, you do remember all that they featured was what was popular back then, or what somebody looked like at the time, where Disney was with all the stars that appeared. And it's something that kind of feels outdated when time actually rolls on and we know that these people probably have passed away. Where, speaking of that, it's something that also makes the Muppets suffer in the current age with new technology and how you utilize them now once again. Where when you realize looking back on all of it right now and what has been shown with the Muppets, they do try to utilize them, but how it's just not in the best way possible with how people shift their habits to other works, hence why it becomes so difficult to really say anything worthwhile when like they have been barely utilized in the issues that have been presented beyond media itself. Like, Disney did still try to make the effort after Most Wanted with the television show, introducing stuff like this one that parodies the likes of The Office and other mockumentaries taking place within Miss Piggy's new late night talk show, which was okay, but not impressive enough where they cancelled that after one season. There was also the issue at the time of Kermit's voice actor that I mentioned earlier that they dismissed after unacceptable business conduct at the time, which even the Henson family themselves would agree with letting go of someone like that with his behavior or outrageous claims he made that led to his ultimate removal, with Matt Vogel on the other hand, who voiced Constantine in Most Wanted, taking over as the voice of Kermit. And his new voice isn't really my favorite or sounds similar to Jim Henson's original in any way, where I think that's where things started to go downhill in terms of their usage or whatever was happening with the Muppets. Like, we just started off well with the film revitalizing the Muppets, but they really couldn't do anything of great value beyond this for the series, because they did try to do another one in 2018, but development was cancelled due to a change in Muppet Studios to do something else creative-wise with the actual first Disney Plus series named Muppets Now back in 2020, one that only has 6 episodes focusing on multiple segments with the characters with improvisational comedy, which of course is nice and all and very simple, but they would still continue to do stuff in this realm from right on there, like the most recent special called Muppets Haunted Mansion, of course based on their own ride at Disneyland, where Gonzo and Pepe would go through the events that take place there. That too was also fun, but also plentiful with celebrity cameos like previous works would ever show. But on the other hand, it's still better than most of the stories of the other Haunted Mansion films that they attempted to do. Where lastly and most recent out of these series was Muppets Mayhem, which focuses on Dr. Teeth and his band navigating through the modern music world and whatnot. All of which shows that they still have a major presence in the Disney brand by creating these shows, but how it's not also as major as what could be on the other side of things, highlighting again that Muppet Vision 3D closure. Like, they still have these characters and they still use them in the parks, with Mayhem being mentioned, but it's not like the grand plans that they used to have or wanted when you take a look at the projects that they have went through. That it seems like even when they try to do more, there is also less of them, where you can't quite know how to put them properly out front. Again, going back to the problem before even Disney brought them with projects that they've worked on and where people's attention might be. Where honestly, thinking about it right now, this was the hardest video to really think of, because I just hear of very conflicting reports between many people saying that they aren't doing enough with the Muppets, or seem like they don't even care, or how they could be abandoned, yet also how they have constantly tried, but it's so something that's not really much to care for. It's not saying that they suck completely or they're all bad, because they are enjoyable works to their own degrees, but there's this weird imbalance problem that the Muppets just exist but don't know how exactly what to do with them anymore. Where when the old things go away, we seem sad and angry that they take them and what could be cherished, or putting in another thing that doesn't seem like should have happened, or the other thing is we just don't know what else to do with that. Where it's just this great dilemma that all of us fans have, including theme park fans like myself, that we have to face with Disney, with the old that had the works of the famed creator before he passed, or going with the new with something that still continues that legacy. Where it's just so hard knowing where exactly this is all headed, or what people really do care about when it comes to these characters now. Like, do younger generations of today really hold these characters as much as our parents did, or maybe even ourselves? Because that's something I really don't have the strongest connection to, but also know its massive impact growing up. That's just something that's up to us to see where the story goes as time continues and shifts with the changing culture. Where the greatest thing to remind us all is wherever that place leads, it's something that at least knows that the Muppets will be there for it, as the problem will continue to exist as long as it exists, and the solution is just something we just have to follow up with. So what I meant to say with all of this is that I really don't know where the Muppets are truly at, what people truly care about. But I do know that their presence in our society is still all the more enjoyable, with puppet-like characters filling the screen, knowing that they can exist to be real as much as we are in this world, and it's better to know how you particularly feel about that rather than just I alone, to know where you stand between wanting them to exist or just less if that's the modern case. Where that's frankly all I have to share, just trying to find a rainbow connection between all of us so we can enjoy it forever. And I'm all done. Goodbye.